Hello, fellow travelers, and welcome to another episode of the Vertical Stars Podcast, third season. For my loyal listeners, thank you for your support. It's an amazing episode because Si Spurrier returns to the mothership to discuss The Flash from DC Comics. Now, come aboard as we go traversing the stars. Hello, Mr. Spurrier. Thank you for coming to Vertical Stars Podcast.
Thank you. It's great to be back.
It's totally my pleasure. It's always good to have a returning champion back on the show. It was a great pleasure talking to you the last time, and I want to talk about Flash for a little while. So during your run the Flash, it seems to demonstrate that Wally has discovered new aspects of the Speed Force. So why do you think Wally's connection is, I don't know if better if the right word, but more sensitive than Barry's?
It's just, I mean, it's sort of something I've inherited and something I was keen to interrogate and explore. It's funny, you find that people have this sort of slightly contradictory reaction to Flash stories that are contingent upon the Speed Force. There's a sort of tendency to roll your eyes and go, oh, another Speed Force story, but at the same time, people are sort of almost fascinated by the fact that it's this quite mysterious thing that nobody's really properly interrogate. Like we spoke about this last time you and I chatted, that the Speed Force has been defined so many times in quite contradictory terms that it's sort of an open game. You can kind of take your pick as to how it works, and that fascinates me. I sort of can't leave that alone. What I wanted to do was tell a story in which we lean into it, but without it being this very sort of sciencey, gobbledygooky sort of notion that boxes creators into a corner by being overly defined. And so the alternative is to get quite psychedelic, and for that, the trappings of cosmic horror were really apposite, and it sort of worked really nicely. It turned, to your question, on something which I think is canonical, which is that in as much as the Speed Force, as it like I've become quite used now to calling it deep change. The idea is that Speed Force is this emanation, this sort of product being pumped out by a kind of dreaming source, which we call the deep change, and it's the sort of elemental force of dynamic change, and the Speed Force is just one expression of it. It's an expression of time, amongst other things, but ultimately it speaks to the way that things alter, metamorph in time. Anyway, back to your question. You've missed my digressions, haven't you?
Totally okay.
Uh, I think it's been established many times that in as much as this is a sort of radiating energy into which speedsters can kind of plug and draw down energy, the conduit which links Wally to this source of energy is the most clear, the purest, the biggest. Like it's tricky not to think in terms of sort of hose pipes, and I found myself quite often picturing it as this sort of extra dimensional diving suit with an air hose, and the air that you're breathing is this profoundly cosmic, ineffable energy source. If that analogy works, and it falls apart if you think about it too much, but if that analogy works, then Wally's tube is bigger than Barry's, and it's that simple. And like that's not to say that one is a better character, not to say that one is more heroic, not to say that one is stronger than the other, just that Wally has access to this energy in a way that nobody else does.
So when you're thinking about once again, because you're writing for the Flash, you're always going to be selecting a comparison between Wally West and Barry Allen. That's almost unavoidable.
Mhm.
When you're trying to express them as characters and potentially as heroes and as using their powers, how do you differentiate Wally using his versus Barry using his?
It's a really good question. And again, worth saying, there are plenty of people out there who will roll their eyes and say they're just a copy of each other. Why bother differentiating? I think they're very different. The thing that makes them similar is that they live extraordinary lives, and yet the most important thing that defines who they are is their humanity, their connections to the people around them, their family, the people they love, the simple day-to-day interactions of other human beings. And I think that's what gives these heroes, specifically these two, but lots of the best heroes too, their their most perfect goodness. And you can take a few steps away from that, and that's when you start to see heroes becoming more godlike, less relatable. um I think something that defines any Flash is their relatability. Barry to me is um, somebody who thinks first and acts second, somebody who is very given to investigation, somebody who is extremely quick to put himself in front of danger so that he can work out how to stop it while making sure nobody else gets hurt. He's a self-sacrificer. Yeah, he's probably just a little bit sharper around the edges, in my view, than Wally is. He's given to exploration. He's not quite a sort of, it's easy in superhero comics to sort of assume that anybody with a slightly investigative scientific bent is going to disappear off towards, Batman-esque brilliance. And I don't think he's that guy. I think that he's much more human than that. And I think, by the way, the whoever it was, it's probably Wade. I don't know. You know better than me all the backstory stuff. But whoever it was who came up with his job being as a forensic detective is bang on the money. What a great idea for a superhero's alter ego. Just so perfect. Wally, is something that a lot of people forget about his earliest appearances as the sort of the sidekick, is that he had a real temper. He's quite driven by his emotions. He's an angry guy who's trying very hard to be a good person. And I think he's less, um, I'm not going to say less thoughtful because that's not true at all. He's less calculating. He's more reactive emotionally. He's an engineer, which is a really nice distinction. If one of these two guys is interested in solving things and the kind of big picture stuff, and here's Wally, who's more interested in taking things apart and seeing how they all work together. That's a really nice sort of way of connecting them whilst having a slightly different take on the whole view. But I think more than anything else for me, especially with the character I inherited from Jeremy, he's a family man. He's a family man who's trying very hard to also be a superhero and a good husband and a good role model. And we talked about this last time, this idea that he is quite unusual in that he's trying to be everything to everybody all at once. And I think there's an awful lot of human drama in that dynamic. And that's sort of what we've been pulling apart and peeling away in the first arc of the story I've been telling. Um, so that's a sort of fundamental difference between the two as I see it. There's also a really interesting dynamic between the two of them when they're in the same place, because there's all this stored up mentor-mentee characterization. There's a history of like one or the other letting the other one down, whether actually or in an imagined way. You can imagine it's simultaneously a relationship that's defined by respect and love, but also an awful lot of baggage. There's probably a lot of guilt, a lot of things that they're not saying to each other, which they probably ought. So it's kind of a really great archetype for a sort of want to say father-son relationship, but I don't think it is. And if it were, it would sort of get in the way of some of the stories I want to tell about Wally's relationship to his kids. It's more like um, the relationship that a lot of us would have had with like the best teacher at school, the one who almost became a friend because they were just so good at their job, or like the uncle who you relate to because you can tell them things that you couldn't tell your own parents, or whatever. That there's most of us have like the cool adult in our lives who is not quite our parents because they ain't going to tell us to stop smoking, and they're not going to tell us to use T in our words and not be swearing out loud. It's the sort of the cool grown up who almost therefore becomes even more heightened, even more idolized. And hell, you throw in the whole heroic vibe as well, and it just becomes so much more pressurized. Um, anyway, suffice to say, before I chunter on for another hour about it, that it's very fertile ground for great drama.
I think one thing that's interesting, the most recent issue, issue 13, Wally West discusses he doesn't know which hat to wear. Husband, hero, father. Now, I mean, obviously that's something, baked into being Wally West and his heroing and when you have a family, everything like that. But as the writer, you have to bake in all those aspects of him as well. And you're doing it knowing, I mean, obviously, as your comic fans, you want the action scenes, that's like, but you can't have that be hollow. You got to have those other moments. How
Mhm.
are you baking in all those hats and making it work and making it still exciting and getting the people to invest in the story?
Just by finding ways that they all sort of intermingle, I suppose. You want to be emotionally honest, and that means um, letting the story have its moments of familial conflict, familial love, intramarital love, all of these things. The privilege, of course, is that these characters move in extraordinary circles, and so even though the dichotomy is how can this guy be a normal member of a nuclear family while also being, a guy who wears an outfit and races around at light speed and solves crime? The answer is that extraordinary stuff tends to happen to this family as well. So in as much as, you want to be able to give, as you say, readers those big beats of explodo and kind of heroic action, generally speaking, you can do it in, in the confines of a family environment because the one world invades the other. Um, and that, like, as we continue to explore this dynamic, that's the sort of thing that some family members might really enjoy. Like, you can already sense that Irie, for instance, Wally's daughter, Irie, she's like yearning to enter that world fully. She wants to do the big, crazy superhero stuff. She wants to be living this heightened, exaggerated reality. Whereas Jay or Jai, depending how you pronounce it, hasn't quite figured out how he feels about it all yet. Does he want to be, in inverted commas, a normal kid? Does he want to take a different path into exploring this extraordinary stuff, which doesn't necessarily hinge upon notions of heroism? And then you've got Lynn, the wife, who is just sort of in this really horrible middle ground where she's been a part of this world. She's had superpowers while she was pregnant, and then they all got taken away from her. And now she's expected to sort of just go back to this totally normal life. And that's again loads of drama, loads of great conflict to mine. And it all, you can throw fireworks at it, you can throw punches at it. It all works quite nicely in ticking all those boxes. But the only way it resolves is because they happen to all love each other. And that's, I think, quite a wonderful tool in a writing. I'm quite a non-sentimental guy, but generally speaking, a really good non-sentimental story will turn on one moment of sentimentality. And it's usually when a bunch of people say, I love you. That's kind of wonderful.
So, without giving too many spoilers away, there's a moment in the story where Jai is kind of taken almost, I don't say as a host, but he's something definitely happens with Jai in issue 13 without giving too much away. What are the ramifications of something like that happening to him? Especially if you're saying if he's someone who doesn't want to be part of this world, he kind of got directly attached to it at that exact moment.
Yeah.
And why him?
We're going to continue exploring that, so I have to be a little circumspect. I don't know. I don't think it's that he doesn't want to be part of that world. I'm not sure that he's figured that out fully yet, but I think what he's circling around is that he doesn't picture himself putting on an outfit and being a like costumed crime fighter. I think I mean, look, let's just call it what it is. In both of Wally's kids, the stories that we're telling, the kind of the metaphor, which isn't really very deeply buried, is these are kids who are sort of discovering who they are. This is like the first stirrings of puberty. And I don't mean that in the sort of, sticky teenage romance way. I mean it in the holy shit, who am I? What am I doing in my life? What's my future hold? I'm having all these interesting new feelings and questions and thoughts, and I don't quite know what to do with them. And I think that's a really interesting thing to explore. And I didn't want to just be like, well, they're going to end up in a superhero team of teenagers, because that just feels like a bit of a cop out to me.
Yeah.
I think that's exactly what Irie wants, and that's all she's interested in is going off and being a superhero. And there's going to be some interesting drama coming in that path. Jai just doesn't really know yet, and I have some ideas about where that's going to go, but it felt honest to me to, given his, I hate this phrase, power set, given his power set has always been quite different to all the other members of the family. He's got this quite unusual suite of abilities. He's very strong. He's able to sort of teleport instantly to his dad, and we are now learning to any other speedster. And I've started baking in explanations for this, because what he's actually doing is um, manipulating this deep change I was waffling about before, this capacity to change things in time to such a exquisite intrinsic degree that, like, becoming instantly strong is a really dumb expression of that. It's so easy to just, I will manipulate my atom so my muscle gets a bit bigger, whatever. He can do that without even thinking about it. But you can start to get much more creative with that. And I like the idea that you can have characters where I did this with Legion, actually, thinking aloud back when I did X-Men Legacy, the characters for whom the sky's the limit. And the challenge is not so much what can I do, but how can I safely figure it out? And what challenges are surrounding me that prevent me from figuring it out? And am I brave enough to just really go for it and see exactly what I can do? And that's kind of where he is. And as I say, that sort of feels like it's one interesting expression of the sort of rites of passage, teenage, pubescent story that some people have. This feeling of being on the cusp of anything, and anything's possible, but you've got to be a little bit brave and figure out exactly what you can do before you go and try and do it. And that's sort of what we'll be exploring a lot in the next arc.
How about there's a reference as well, and I believe it's referring to the Speed Force as being God and God having a baby. Now
Yeah.
that's quite a thing to drop. Not only having Speed Force as a, I think it's the first time I've heard it referred to as a god versus like a force of nature. It's now basically like a god and having a baby. Now that's kind of a big deal.
It is.
And I'm sure, I mean, it was only a little piece of dialogue that happened in. I mean, that whole, well, maybe a couple of pages, but that's got to have huge ramifications to not only how you see the Speed Force, whoever baby the Speed Force can have, that's considerable as well. So can you kind of break down what's to be expected from that?
Again, I have to be a little coy, because that will be the meat of quite a lot of what's coming. Um, I should clarify that it's Irie who goes, "This is God and it's having a baby," and then Jay waffles on about, well, actually, that's not really true. That's a little bit of an oversimplification, and it's true. Both of those things can be true at the same time. Um, the the really fun beat that I wanted to include from the beginning, and this takes us back to something I was talking about before, this sort of vaguely defined notion of what the Speed Force is. I picture it as a being, something so unutterably complicated and huge that we just can't think about it. It would be like an ant imagining Judeo-Christian God. It's not even about it's a God. It's like on an order of magnitude that just doesn't even count on that scale anymore. It sits outside of time and space. It has no particular physical being that we would be able to understand. The only way we know it exists is that it dreams time and our flow of time, this mysterious thing that's all around us at all times, that we sort of have the illusion of causality and linear time, is emanating outwards from it. It's like it's dribble, or it's yawns, or the dreams that flow from it, and we're all sort of adrift in its reality. And I wouldn't go quite so far as to say that it's sort of the creator of reality, but that would be a sensible assumption. I don't want to box myself in like that. All of these big heady concepts are much better when you sort of leave the door open on them. Um, but yes, it was discovered throughout the entire of the first arc that it was in pain. It appeared to be having these seizures all the way through from the very beginning, like in that first little sort of teaser we did in issue 300, we made it very clear that all of our characters were having like power hiccups, little strange spasms where their powers kept going wrong, and it was just sort of strung out as this mystery. And we thought we'd figured it out because of all the stuff that was going on in the story. We thought that Wally and his other speedster Flash family colleagues were responsible for hurting the very thing that was giving them their power in a sort of the analogy was like mosquitoes sticking their proboscis in and draining the blood. It actually turned out that wasn't the case at all. That was just a sort of elaborate illusion being spun by the villains of the piece. And what was really going on was that the Speed Force was in pain for a very different reason. And it came down to Lynn, Wally's wife, who's been through this 3 times now, to explain that she recognized these are labor pains. This is the fear and anxieties and pains of one being which is about to do something, whether it's to multiply or to ascend into a higher state or to, it's been left vague and these answers are coming. But was it a moment in which a chrysalis becomes a butterfly? Was it a moment in which a cell divides? That's all to be revealed, but something quite profound happened, and the family was there to help it to happen. And again, non-sentimental person, but we have a scene where literally their love, their connection to each other is the thing that calms everything down just enough to allow this to happen. Um, so yeah, that's where we are. And then we open in issue 14 in a totally different vibe, totally different scenario, and everything seems to be back on track. And it's no longer about like heady cosmic horror. It's a much more straightforward Flash adventure where Wally and his family go on a camping trip. But something's different, something's very clearly different, and it's going to get more and more obvious as we go along that strange things are going on.
Well, to go back to a little bit what you said, I'm going to poke at it a little bit.
Yeah.
You're talking about Speed Force, or God, depending on who you're talking to, as being, and his dreams are basically how we understand time in our reality. Okay. Now, anything that happens to this, like I said, if it's a cocoon and a metamorphosis is going to happen, there's going to be a change, or the baby, or however you want to look at it. It does not seem like that's good for us to have everything how we understand our reality suddenly like changing us. It kind of like we suddenly had the poles like flipped over. There's going to be an effect from that. And
Maybe.
how nervous should people be of this?
Um, I'm not gonna answer that question, but just bear in mind there is a far more beautiful take on it, which is that here is everything we know, and it appears to have just created a new everything we know, and that's quite a nice yes to be yes to be scared of because you don't know the unknown is always a little bit scary, but without wishing to spoil things, I draw you back to the conversation we were having about Jay or Jai, what he can do. If anybody were going to um, nursemaid, keep an eye on an infant everything, then he's probably the one for the job.
Okay. What else can readers look forward to in the upcoming issues of The Flash?
Dinosaurs,
Ooh,
lots of that. So we're what I really was. So this is like a peek behind the curtain. Because of the big initiatives going on at DC at the moment, which are awesome. The Absolute line being launched, the All-In project, which basically it made sense for all the big books to treat the October issue as if it's like a jumping on point, a big relaunch. And lots of the books are being relaunched. Flash is one of the few where the creative teams are staying, or at least the writer is staying the same. Um, the immediate temptation was to just go big and to be like, right, let's do something in space. Let's change everything. Let's start with the death of a character. Let's, all those sort of immediate, obvious cliche ways that writers will instantly grope for to really throw a spanner in the works and to broadcast that everything's different and bigger and better and stronger, and you definitely need to sign in, blah, 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 blah. And I was like, no, fuck it. I'm taking the family camping. So we're going camping. And the vibe is like fantastic for going on a family holiday to the Savage Land, right? So DC's version of that is this incredible place called Skartaris, which is a sort of Hollow Earth fantasy introduced in a really wonderful old comic called Warlord, which has sort of come and gone over the years. I urge anybody to track down. In fact, they're just about to do some new omnibus editions of the old Warlord stuff. It's really, really good. It's absolutely batshit crazy and wonderful. And it's about this Air Force pilot who crash lands and ends up on the inside of this hollow Earth. And he wears this incredible costume, which consists of pretty much nothing except a helmet and a pistol and a sword. And he goes and has adventures, and there's dinosaurs, and there's lost Atlantean civilizations. And it's just like, for me, it's like catnip because it's the sort of story where it's just idea after idea after idea, and it all works because it's a land of anything goes. And I thought, well, look, if you're Wally West and you've been through an awful lot and you want to take your family somewhere where it's going to be like a mixture of a wonderful bonding experience, but also kind of exotic and adventurous and amazing to make because they live and breathe wonder, right?
Hmm.
He decides to take them there. And immediately there's two things that happen. One is that things start to go wrong, and the other is that you quickly realize he's not been entirely honest with them. He's come here for a reason, and I mean, I'm not going to tell you the whole reason, but part of the reason is that there's a villain who has escaped from like a weather wizard, right? Weather wizard, what an amazing, silly villain. And that's the sort of like Wally's like, okay, well, my family needs a holiday, and it would be kind of fun if we can solve a crime all together. So let's go catch weather wizard. And he takes them into Skartaris, where there's dinosaurs and Amazon princesses, and it's just brilliant. But there's more going on, and to come full circle, the whole crisis, identity crisis that he was facing throughout that first arc, in which he was trying to be everything to everybody, hasn't gone away. You know, he's solved the big riddle, he saved the world, his family has been reminded of his love for them, everything's worked out, but nothing's changed. He's still a superhero who is also a dad and a father and a husband and all of this stuff. And he's figured out, this is a tease, he's figured out a way of making that all a bit easier. And it's not obvious when we come into issue 14. So at the end of that issue, there's quite a big twist that, to go back to the whole, I could have put them in space and exploded everything and killed it. It's that level of twist. I just thought it made more sense to start with something really fun and then deliver the big beat at the end rather than
Hmm.
it sort of being a big everything's different. So yeah, that's my tease.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Further Stars Podcast. Please like and subscribe. Please return for part 2 of this interview when Si Spurrier returns to the mothership to discuss Hellblazer Dead in America from DC Comics. To next voyage, travel on.